Welcome to EMDR Chat with Curt and Michelle. I'm Dr. Curtis Roundson.
And I am Dr. Michelle Gottlieb, and we are very excited to talk with all of you today. And let me excuse my voice. I'm catching a little bit of a cold, so excuse the way my voice sounds. We have a guest today. We have a guest, Dr. Deborah Silveria, and we're very excited to have her with us for a variety of reasons. First off, she is an so amazingly talented presenter and trainer in EMDR therapy. And one of the incredible things she does is she does trainings on early interventions. So first, Deb, hi, hello. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Deb.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Curt. Hi, Michelle. So honored and grateful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank
you for coming.
And so the first question I have for you that we get asked all the time, why do we need early interventions and what are they?
Such an important question. And we need to be able to justify what early interventions are. I'm going to pose a question to you. If we remove a trauma early, it doesn't get entrenched, correct?
Correct.
And we're also possibly building resilience. I like the metaphor of a splinter. Why wait for it to get infected? Something doesn't usually get better if it doesn't get taken care of. It usually gets worse. Haven't we seen this? Secondary disorders are more likely to surface if current traumas are untreated. Clients with trauma histories, there's comorbid functioning. They now come in with substance abuse and anxiety disorders. You see this. So why early intervention following trauma is for prevention. Maybe we can reduce the distress and suffering. There's that decreased risk of these, extra disorders or comorbid, such as substance abuse and other disorders. Also from the ACE study, we know there's extensive risk of physical illness. As Bessel van der Kolk says, the body contains the trauma and keeps the score. There's the cost to society. We have jobs that people leave. They can't work. There's more inpatient. And then it impacts the quality of life. Look at the cost to families that are impacted by the substance abuse or the trauma, the PTSD of their coworkers. They come home irritable. They use substances. It impacts the quality of their life. So that's why we need it.
I remember being taught, though, I couldn't do trauma unless it had been, for 3 to 6 months. That it had to be sitting there percolating. And what you're saying is that we don't have to let it percolate.
No, we don't. We don't need to let it percolate during all of that time. And this brings up another interesting point. We love this story. Sheldon Kopp, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. And one of the little stories in there is, let's say we're all going out and we're in the forest and we get lost and we can't find our way out and we find a little hut. And so we knock on the door and a man comes out. We say, oh my goodness, how long have you lived here? And he says, I've lived here 40 years. And we're so excited because now we can get a way out. So we say, oh my gosh, you've lived here 40 years. We are lost. Please lead us out of the forest. And the little man says, well, I know many ways that do not lead out of the forest after living here for 40 years. Perhaps we can find a way out together. So we can all go together to figure out the mystery because let's look at what is early intervention. Well, the World Health Organization and the DSM said in 2013 that the first month was early intervention. Then the UK came along in 2018, the NICE guidelines, their National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, updated and considered interventions over 3 time periods. The first month they call prevention, months 2 and 3 they call treatment, and delayed PTSD treatment is for symptoms after 3 months. Then ISTSS, the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, updated their guidelines also in 2018, and they say the first 3 months. And they distinguish between single and multiple session interventions. Oh, so what is early intervention? Then it gets more complicated. And this is a communication to me from Alon Shapiro, who developed the GTEP, the Group Traumatic Episode Protocol, and also the RTEP, the Recent Traumatic Episode Protocol. He developed that with his colleague Brui Laub after the war in Lebanon in 2006, things that they had learned. But he talked to Neil Rogers, who's the lead author of the Cochrane studies and the NICE guidelines. And actually, he asked him what position he had in the DSM-5 as to what is recent event. And I am going to quote from Neil Rogers. He said, "There is reasonable consensus in the traumatic stress field that a 3-month window is a sensible, let's all go out together, it makes sense, right? As a time frame for defining an early intervention." But this is the second part, Curt, that is wonderful. Although we have discussed with many that there are many life-changing traumas, and this window is less meaningful. And so one of the things that we have found is, and maybe this is for another podcast, but we can use the recent traumatic event protocol after a recent event. But what about in complex trauma? If your clients are so flooded, we might be able to fractionate it, kind of like EMD, and break it up into little pieces so you can use a recent event protocol or a recent episode, traumatic episode protocol, a year, 2 years later. For example, I had the great privilege of, there was a, oh my gosh, there's been so many shootings, huh, Curt?
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
there
way
was
too many.
way too many. But you may remember in 2015, December 2nd, there was a terrorist attack in San Bernardino where the radicalized Muslim and his wife went in and shot up their co-workers and killed 15 of them. I had the great privilege of doing a retreat for some of the survivors. And there was someone who came in, and this was, politics and funding. It took 1.5 years in order to provide the retreat. And someone came in and they told me the story of the shooting. And it was, I saw the man in the doorway. It was the fatigues. He took out the gun. They ran down the hallway. I ran into the closet. I heard the machine gun. It was still in that fragmented form that Francine had noticed before. So if it hasn't knit together, and there's a lot of complex trauma, you can use these early interventions later. Isn't that wonderful?
I think that is such an important reminder for us that, not being so rigid. I'm sorry, it's past 90 days. You can't use this anymore. No, it can be so useful and so important. So thank you, Deb. Absolutely.
And you're really looking at how integrated or fragmented the memory is as in terms of what intervention you're using.
Right?
Right. And that's what Francine first looked at. Okay. She looked at the nature of the memory. I believe it was after an earthquake. Mm-hmm. And she saw that things were fragmented. Okay. Now, when Elon came and became interested in early interventions in 2006, that was the only concept that Francine acknowledged. And he thought that there was more. Now, she knew that the nature of the memory wasn't consolidated. It was in these little fragmented forms. But he looked at it and he added the nature of the situation. So when somebody comes in after a shooting in the first few days after or weeks, they're in acute distress and arousal. And so we're going to have to think, he postulated, that there's extra containment that you need to have in the protocol in order to manage the distress. And then the last thing that he thought about was the nature of the therapy contract. Is it okay to only work on this piece through this event and put the rest in the container? With early interventions, we're only going to work on this piece. So we teach a lot of containment and keep that processing contained and not let it rip into the whole brain. So that's different than the standard protocol where you go to the touchstone or the earliest or all of these in the client's life.
Right.
Interesting. Interesting. I like how, the development of early interventions has gotten more thoughtful, if that's the best way of saying it, of really what does the client need. I really like that.
Right. And remember, we started out with the infamous EMD protocol that was originally published, I think, in 1987 and then abandoned in the 90s. But it was reintroduced in the emergency situations in 2004 in the HAP Military and Post-Disaster Field Manual. But Francine had found, oh my goodness, from EMD, she'd slipped into this wonderful EMDR reprocessing of other events. Okay. And so then she did conceptualize the recent event protocol, and she conceptualized that as this fragmented experience which hasn't consolidated so that no single image can represent the entire event. So she said it was necessary to process a number of targets, which, as you know, are aspects or parts of the event in order to facilitate integration and consolidation. And I want to emphasize the word event, because when Francine conceptualized the protocol, it was about the event itself, like when the car accident happened, when it started, and then the car accident was over. What Ilan and Beirut did is they expanded it to the entire episode.
Right.
Okay. For example, I had a client, and she, actually, this was not my client, but I'm going to give somebody else's story because I like it. There was a client of theirs that had a seizure and bit their tongue and fell to the floor in front of their 4-year-old. And when they came to, their 4-year-old was looking at them. Now, the worst part of this event, I might think, was their 4-year-old in horror looking at them because your tongue bleeds a lot and all bloody around the face. But the worst part of this event for that particular client was 4 months later when the doctor told her that she might never be able to be alone with her children again until they were 13 years of age because of her seizures. So the event was over, but this is the whole episode leading up until today. So the episode is from the time it happened all the way up to today. And that's what Ilan introduced in his protocols. Now, I've just kind of talked about RTEP and GTEP, but there's many early EMDR intervention protocols.
And that's what I wanted to ask you, if you could speak to, because it's not just EMD, it's not just Francine's protocol, and not just RTEP, which you've been speaking about, but what else is available?
There's so many available. There's the ISP that was done by Gary Quinn, and that's a first aid procedure, and it focuses on safety and orienting to the positive cognition with BLS right after an event. He developed that in Israel. There's also a protocol for recent critical incidents, the PRESI, which is for ongoing traumatic stress, and that's by Nacho Herrero and Lucy Artigas, and that was developed in 2009. And then there's the Integrative Group Treatment Protocol, the IGTP, also developed by Herrero, and it offers, it's very effective for large groups and for children. Marilyn Luber, she has her scripted protocols. She has an entire book on early EMDR interventions. And there's also an early EMDR toolkit on the EMDR Foundation, Research Foundation's website as well.
You also just mentioned, kind of in passing, but let's speak a little bit more about it, that for, I think, almost all of the ones you spoke about, not only are there individual interventions, there's group protocols.
Yes, there are. And actually, there is a book that I had the great privilege of co-authoring a chapter in.
Yay!
With Dr. Robbie Adler Tapia. And what we did is we did it with first responders, because I do a lot of work with law enforcement and first responders after, for example, officer-involved shootings, fires, and things like that. And we did a chapter in that book, but there's a whole book coming out from Springer, and it's supposed to be published. It is on Amazon at the end of the month. It's supposed to come out, and it's on group interventions for EMDR therapy. And there are many interventions in there that are early EMDR interventions, as well as developing the field into more long-term interventions, because let's do the math. There's such a need for group. There's more trauma in the world than there are individual therapists. And they used to have some statistic, 75% of the people will have a trauma in their life. Well, I think if you lived on the planet, Curt, right?
That's right.
3 years, a pandemic would qualify that everybody on the planet has been exposed to, as well as the other types of things that have fallen out as a result of, the COVID.
I don't know. I don't want to misspeak, but I actually think that now in the development of research that there's more research on group kinds of protocols in the use of EMDR, and almost in the individual use. It's really interesting how this exploded because of the need that is necessary.
Such a need.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
absolutely,
again, going from there, because people ask all the time, right, is how valid are these protocols? There's been a lot of research done on the early interventions, group and individual.
Right.
Absolutely. And especially since the COVID and Zoom. One of the positive things, I don't think the COVID is ever a good thing, but there are good things that can come out of bad things. And one of them is, I think, Zoom. I couldn't spell Zoom, Curt, before the pandemic. And if you'd have told me that I'd be doing EMDR or group EMDR with somebody I hadn't met in my office and done a thorough biopsychosocial, I'd say I kind of like my license.
Yeah, it had been unethical, unprofessional, illegal.
But as you know, Curt, the research shows that the internet does
It
work.
does.
So I'm part of an international community that does the RTEP and the GTEP, because as you know, I'm an RTEP soon to be trainer signed off by Elon.
Woohoo!
And because of the earthquakes that happened in Turkey, because of the war in the Ukraine, this wonderful group of therapists did Zoom GTEPs with people in the Ukraine, with therapists, so that they could help other therapists and be there for them. They did with someone in a bathtub hearing bombs going off overhead. Jeez. They were able to do the GTEP. There's so much research coming out that's published in the last couple of years, and they are valid in terms of randomized controlled trials as well, which is absolutely fascinating. So there's a plethora that's come out in the last couple of years because of the internet being so available to do the groups on.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention, right?
So, Deb, we're almost out of time. What would you, if there was one thing that our listeners could take from today, what would you want them to grab hold of?
Well, I love group. Okay. I love group. I would tell people if this is my thing, I love RTEP and GTEP, because RTEP, okay, the recent traumatic episode protocol, is not just, as we've seen, just for those 1 to 3 months when the memory is not consolidated. We know that the memory cannot be consolidated for years later, or it can be used with clients that have complex PTSD and they're not able to self-regulate. So we can add it to our armamentarium of tools when the basic protocol doesn't work, when our standard protocol may not be the treatment of choice for our clients. And I love group because do the math, like I said. And you can use this, like GTEP is being used with medical staff after the COVID. There was a study with cancer patients. There's a study, you can use it with children. They're using it for residential out-of-home care staff. Some other research that's coming in is with postpartum depression, with hospice workers, because they get traumatized a lot with having their patients die, and doing this group treatment with hospice workers. It's fabulous.
It is.
Thank you, Deb, for all that you bring and all the work that you do. It's amazing. And everyone, please remember there's early interventions. We don't have to wait 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months later. We can help so people don't develop PTSD. Please remember that there are group protocols so we can help even more people, and that there are amazing trainers like Deb who will help teach you how to do it all. So
Yes, thank you, Deb. And all of you who've listened, thank you again for listening with us. And until next time, we'll see you.
have a great day, everyone.